On today's episode, we are talking about functional testing, specifically the Dutch test. Definitely check out last week's episode where we talked about food sensitivity testing. So in our Fab Fertile Couples Coaching Program, we include functional testing. So food sensitivity testing, the Dutch test, which looks at your hormones using urine, really gives us good clues as to what is going on with your hormones. So then we can develop a customized protocol just for you. Looking at blood alone does not give us all the clues. So the Dutch test is a cutting edge test and functional test that we use. We also use the stool test, looking at the DNA of your stool. A lot of people having gut infections. So that is part of our couples coaching program, as well as the hair tissue mineral analysis test. And that one looks at your mineral status. And we have got a podcast on that one as well. But basically for that one, a lot of people have been on long-term hormonal birth control, and they potentially could be well fed, but undernourished. So those are the 4 tests that we use. And then we develop a specific protocol just for you. And we're not focusing on the test. We're looking at the test in conjunction with your health history. So definitely sit down and listen to this episode today. There is you can actually download the Dutch test that we are discussing, so you can follow along and see exactly the information that you'll get from the Dutch test and how this can be so essential for you as you're on your fertility journey. Thanks so much for listening, and feel free to leave a review on iTunes. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening to the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. And I've got a favor to ask you. If you are enjoying learning about the functional approach to fertility, consider going to iTunes and rating and reviewing the podcast. This is how it helps the show reach more people that are struggling with infertility, knowing that there's another approach that really can get to the bottom of why it's not working in the first place. So all you need to do is, if you're on the app or the desktop, just go in and consider leaving a 5-star rating and leave a review. And there is step-by-step instructions in the show notes showing you exactly how to do that. So if you can just take a few minutes, right now. You can pause this recording, come back, leave the review. It would really mean the world to me and help others that are on the fertility journey as well. Take care. Hey there. I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call is for action takers, and really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. One theme that keeps coming up with the couples in our Fab Fertile Couples Coaching Program is sleep. Whether it's insomnia, having a hard time falling asleep, waking up at night, or feeling tired when we wake up, sleep is critical for fertility and hormones. And that's why I'm so excited to have Blue Blocks as our podcast sponsor. So we're exposed to blue and green light from our phones, our tablets, our computers, indoor lights, and more. And this exposure impacts our melatonin production. And melatonin is essential for both female and male fertility. It helps determine the frequency and duration of our cycle and impacts sperm. There's lots of blue light blocking glasses on the market, but the ones from Blue Blocks, they've actually compared other popular brands, and Blue Blocks block 100% of blue and green light, while other brands fall short. So I have their sleep glasses. They have red lenses, and the ones I have are a little translucent frame, and they're so stylish and really cool. And so they eliminate 100% of the blue and green light in the 400 nanometer to 550 nanometer range. So this is the exact range that has been shown in clinical studies to disrupt melatonin and negatively impact your sleep. So all you do is wear your sleep glasses after sunset until it's time for bed, and you'll notice improved sleep after just one use. And it's also cool to use when you're flying for managing jet lag. So I got to say, I was a little skeptical about the noticing improvement after one use, but literally I use these glasses and my sleep is actually already pretty good. I used them for one day, and I have to say, after one day, I had the best sleep of my life. I just felt so rested. So these glasses, they ship free and they're tracked for all orders anywhere in the world. And also they have all their frames come in prescription, non-prescription, and reading glasses. Plus you can send in your frames and they'll add the blue light blocking and green light blocking lenses to your frame. So this is an easy hack that you can add to your fertility toolkit. All you do is go to BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com. Use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast at checkout and receive a 15% discount. That's BlueBlocks, BLOX.com, and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast to receive your 15% discount. I didn't need to go to donor eggs. Obviously, I don't regret it. I have beautiful children. I could have done things differently, restored. I was still cycling back in my 20s. I could have looked at my health, the environmental toxins, the stress I was under.
Many, many women are being told their eggs are too old. That's often merely an assumption that's not based on actual evidence. The reason being that there is no direct test of egg quality. You can't test egg quality.
It's the man who's got a food sensitivity or he has a zinc deficiency.
Like there can be a root cause to these symptoms that are, quote unquote, period problems, that the doctor will pass you a pill without any question of why.
And some part of you knows that if you can reframe your journey from not want to struggle, or if it is struggle, learn how to embrace the struggle. Learn how to embrace it.
Most conditions in the child occur during the 9 months of development. It's the genetic switches are turned on or turned off, and they're pre-programmed. So you are in such a powerful, amazing position to do amazing things for your kids.
Why is IVF the first step? Because we believe it should be the last step. Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey there, my name is Sarah Clark, and my mission is to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Most of all, I want you to wake up. So with functional medicine, we can discover what causes infertility and eventually reverse the condition. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Brandy Buskow to the podcast. And we are digging into the Dutch test, and we're seeing how that impacts your fertility. So definitely check out episode number 6 for a functional medicine 101 talk, plus a look at some of the tools we use to help couples conceive. So Brandy is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, a certified transformational health coach, and emotional freedom technique practitioner as well, so tapping. She loves supporting women so they can learn how functional medicine addresses the underlying cause of disease or illness. Before we jump into today's show, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this to make sure you never miss an episode. Hey, Brandy, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to go through the Dutch test, and we're going to actually have a link in the show notes where you can pull up, because we're actually going to use an actual Dutch test, where you can pull up the Dutch test and follow along. So that'll be in the show notes, and you can follow along because it is a fairly quite detailed test, and there's different dials and readings and things to look at that. So it'll be helpful if you had that in front of you when you were listening, but you can certainly listen along too if you're listening without access to being able to look at that. So with that, so Brandy, I guess let's where did you want to start first?
So I guess what we'll do is we'll do a little kind of introduction to what the Dutch test might look like when somebody gets it. And you kind of mentioned the dials. So the way that they kind of report numbers on the Dutch test is they make them look like this little speedometer. And when we're looking at the numbers, we kind of see the dial like a speedometer would in a certain range. And so if you're looking at the test that we're going to post that goes along with this podcast, you'll notice a lot of those dials in a lot of different ranges. And so when we're kind of referring to those, that's what you're going to be looking at, whether or not it's in range or if it's really high. So it's like really trending on the high side, like you're speeding in your car, or if it's on the low side, like you're barely moving at all. So just kind of a good idea and an explanation on what you're looking at when you're looking at the Dutch test. Usually when you get a Dutch test, the first page, it goes over the hormones, so a hormone summary. And the hormones that the Dutch test looks at are estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol, and melatonin. So those are the main hormones that the Dutch test looks at and tests for. And of those hormones, they also allow us to kind of look downstream or deeper at each of those hormones. So rather than just having a total estrogen number, we'll have that, but we'll also then say, okay, of that estrogen, what is that estrogen doing with the different forms of estrogen that our body produces? And the reason that that's good is it gives us some more insight as to, if it looks like you have high estrogen, well, what kind of estrogen are you making? Are you making the protective estrogen, or are you making the estrogen can sometimes be considered the bad estrogen, the one that can cause DNA damage and you don't want to have high levels of? So that's the nice thing about the Dutch test.
Yeah, it's important. So we have a motto here with the test, don't guess. So we start our couples coaching program with the functional testing. So we're looking at food sensitivity testing, the Dutch test, and then stool testing, looking at the DNA of the stool. So a lot of people come to us and they may have this whole, host of supplements they're using, and could be using Vitex, and some people that have low ovarian reserve, they're supplementing with DHEA. They could be using maca. They could be like a whole bunch of different things they're taking. But our thing is, let's test to see what's happening first, to see if you actually need, like, if those supplements may be good for a quality or whatever it may be, but are they right for your body? So it's really important to is looking at a very personalized or customized approach to this. And we also, on episode 33, I interviewed Dr. Carrie Jones. She's the medical director for Precision Analytical, which is the creator of the Dutch. So that's an awesome episode too, where we dig a lot into just a general overview of the Dutch. And this episode here is more, let's look at the actual test and kind of, what would it mean, just digging in further to the actual dials and things that are on the test.
Yeah, for sure. And Dr. Carrie Jones is definitely the expert on this test. So that is a really great interview to listen to. So as you mentioned, we're going to be going through a sample report of some test results and kind of give you a high level overview of, by looking at this test, what is it telling us about this person? So as I mentioned, the first page of the test is the hormone summary test. So on that first page, you're shown a total estrogen, a total progesterone, and your total testosterone. And so for this particular person that we're looking at the results for, their total estrogen is within the range, which is good. We want to have a nice healthy estrogen level. And it's at the higher end of the range, but it is in range. And the progesterone levels for this particular person is in the range, but much lower than the estrogen. And so if you're looking at this, you would then kind of right off the bat see, because the estrogen level is a lot higher on the dial and the progesterone is a lot lower on the dial, this is a person that likely is having some symptoms of estrogen dominance. And it's something that's fairly common. Even if you have low estrogens, you can still have a situation where you have estrogen dominance, and you'll have the symptoms that go along with that. Things like painful periods and mood swings and bloating, anger, anxiety, all of those things can go along with estrogen dominance. Tender breasts, cysts, fibrocystic breasts, those are all really common to seeing with estrogen dominance. And like I said, your estrogen doesn't have to be super high for you to be in a situation where you might have estrogen dominance. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're looking at the test results. Even if it's low, you could still be having these symptoms because your progesterone level is much lower.
Yeah, and then many women we work with, we also see it in well, it's interesting though, actually, because even though if someone does present with diminished ovarian reserve, it doesn't necessarily always mean that their estrogen is low.
Right. I mean, there are times definitely where we will see that. So if you're looking at the dial and it goes outside of the range to the low end, we would consider that. It doesn't necessarily mean that person is in menopause, but this is a level of hormone that we would see in somebody that is menopausal. And so we do have women that come to us where that is what happens. Their hormone levels are on the very low end, outside of the range, and they almost look menopausal. But we do have many women that have diminished ovarian reserve that come to us who have very healthy estrogen levels. But if you look at the other hormones, their testosterone is really low, their DHEA is really low, and their progesterone level isn't matching the estrogen, and so they have a situation of estrogen dominance.
Yeah, and these people may have been told that, donor eggs are their only option, whereas let's look into the markers here and see exactly what's happening rather than potentially jumping to conclusions before we've actually looked at the whole body.
Right. And that's why it's really important to not just look at the total numbers and treat what the number says on the paper. So a lot of times if you're going to your doctor and they do the blood test and they look at your levels and they'll say, okay, well, this level's high, this level's low. So let's give you something to lower the one that's high, and let's give you something to raise the one that's low. And that's kind of a Band-Aid approach, because it's not really asking the question, well, why is there an imbalance in the first place? And what can we look at that will dig a little bit deeper and kind of give us a reason why the hormones are imbalanced and why the body is causing these levels to be way up or way down. And let's work on that first before just automatically jumping to giving hormones in hopes that we can correct the number on the test paper.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so as far as progesterone then?
Yeah. So with progesterone, the Dutch test isn't urine, it's a urine test. So urine isn't the best measure for progesterone. So with the Dutch test, it will give us an average of what they think is in there, but it doesn't give us the actual amount that's available to the cells. So it is helpful because it's going to tell us, how much estrogen that person has, but it doesn't tell us how much is actually available for the cells to use. And so although, we like this test for all of the other reasons where it gives us a lot of information about testosterone and about estrogen and about cortisol, it is not the greatest test for progesterone, but it still does give us some really good clues and really good information, and will let us know if there's a situation where there's some estrogen dominance or if your progesterone levels are low. So it will definitely tell us that.
And then as far as testosterone?
So for testosterone, if we are looking at the test results that we're sharing with this podcast, this particular person has very low testosterone, which is actually, we see pretty commonly with the women that we work with. We commonly see low testosterone levels. And some of the reasons for low testosterone could be things like a low-fat diet. So we already talked about in previous podcasts the importance of eating good quality fats because they're the building blocks for hormones. So if you are eating a low-fat diet, or you have eaten a low-fat diet in the past, this can be one of the reasons why your body isn't producing enough testosterone. The same is true for low cholesterol. So if you're having fats, but you're not having enough of the right fats that contain cholesterol, like egg yolks and a lot of animal products, that can contribute to having low testosterone. Some other things would be nutrient deficiencies. So if you are eating all the fats and you're eating really good quality food, but your body isn't actually able to break them down and absorb them, so you're not making enough bile in your stomach, you're not making enough digestive enzymes, then you're not going to be able to break down those foods and absorb the fats and the cholesterol from the food that you're eating to make testosterone. And so in the instance of this particular client, we do know that their gut issues are a problem. And so that's very likely one of the reasons that testosterone is low, is because of the inability to absorb the nutrients properly as the building blocks for hormones. Some of the other reasons for low testosterone could be blood sugar imbalances. That's really common. Oxidative stress. So that would be if you have a lot of toxins in your environment and you're not reducing the toxic loads, you're not changing your personal care products, or you're working in an environment with a lot of poor air quality or even toxins that are used, like paints, and maybe you work in a place where they deal with metal, all those sorts of things. And then stuff like hypothyroidism can be a really common cause for low thyroid, and even childbirth. So if you've had children and you're postpartum, it could take several years postpartum for your hormones to come back to normal. And so it's not uncommon to see low testosterone levels in women for all of these reasons.
Yeah, so secondary infertility.
Yeah, for sure. And these are all the things that we talk about. There's so many things that can contribute to low testosterone. So to just give something to boost testosterone really isn't digging into the reasons why the testosterone is low in the first place. And that's really important.
Yeah, it's that old way of thinking where you're like stuck on that diagnosis, in this case, an infertility diagnosis, and not digging in further as to why it's happening. Yeah, definitely check out episode number 16. Brandy and I talk about healthy fats and what's healthy fats to add in there. And also there's a blog that we've written on blood sugar, so you can check that out at fabfertile.com. and just search for blood sugar log. And then also with potential leaky gut or nutrient deficiencies, a lot of women that we speak to have been on long-term birth control, which then could impact the beneficial flora or the microbiome, as well as your nutrient levels, which then potentially could set you up for, leaky gut, food sensitivities, and gut infections. So that can be some other clues in there as well.
Yeah, there's just so many things that are a factor. And all of the things that I just mentioned are also some of the more common reasons for low progesterone and low estrogen as well. So it's a very common pattern for all of the hormones that, if you have any sort of deficiencies, you're not eating enough good fats, you've got environmental toxins, maybe you have a leaky gut, hypothyroidism, blood sugar imbalance, stress in general, long-term stress in general, mental emotional stress can all have a huge impact on your body's ability to produce enough healthy levels of hormones. But it's not just testosterone that's affected, it's all of the hormones that can be affected for these reasons.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as cortisol.
So cortisol is an important hormone, and it's one that is secreted by the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are little glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they are responsible for producing cortisol, which is what we know as the stress hormone in times of stress. Now, cortisol is an important hormone. We do need it. We need it for times where we do need that quick burst of energy to deal with the stressor. Like if you've ever been in a car accident and, you're kind of in that moment of not necessarily shock, but you need to just act very quickly. You've heard of stories of people who've just been able to lift a car off of somebody and they have no idea how they did it. It's because our bodies have been hardwired to have this ability that when an emergency happens and stress happens, that we can pump out the hormones necessary for our body to act quickly. And so cortisol is important for that reason. The problem that happens with cortisol is in the day and age that we live today, the stressors that we endure every day are constant. So it's not like it was 100 years ago where, the biggest stressor, might be an animal in your yard that's attacking you or, a fire or some natural disaster. I mean, our stressors every day are waking up to screaming kids, having fights with our spouses before we go to work. We're in the car, we're late, we're in a traffic jam, there's an accident, our boss is calling us because we're not getting there on time. We have these deadlines. I mean, it's a constant barrage of stress. And so our body is constantly in that state of fight or flight, and we need to pump out cortisol. We need to help you to survive the next stressor. And usually before the Dutch test came about, one of the best tests to look for cortisol was what we call the salivary adrenal stress index test. And what you would do is you would spit into a tube 4 times throughout the day, and they would take that and they would kind of get an average of your cortisol throughout the day, but then also tell you what your cortisol was doing. Was it high or was it low at that different point? And so when you wake up in the morning, ideally your cortisol should be highest because that's the hormone that's going to kick in that wakes you up. And you want to have high energy first thing in the morning. And then slowly throughout the day, your level of cortisol should, on a nice slope, slowly go down to a very low level by the nighttime when it's time for you to go to sleep. So when we were using the salivary hormone test, we were looking at that pattern to see, was it a nice high in the morning and then slowly going down in the evening? So that gave us a lot of insights. And if it didn't, then we would be wondering, well, why is the cortisol spiking at times when it shouldn't? The other thing with that is that it gave us that, like I said, that average overall total cortisol for the day, which would give us some clues on whether or not you were producing enough cortisol to keep up with your stressful life. The problem with that test, and this is what sets the Dutch test apart, is that it only gave you that total, but it didn't really tell you how much cortisol your adrenal glands were actually making. And the Dutch test does a good job because it will actually tell you this is how much cortisol you're making, but this is how much your body is actually able to use. And that's a really big difference because we've had a lot of years where you've heard the term adrenal fatigue. It's kind of one of those common things where everybody's coming out and saying, oh, well, I have adrenal fatigue. I went to my practitioner and they told me that I have adrenal fatigue and my adrenal glands are tired and I need to do things to help my adrenal glands. And we're now learning as science is kind of investigating further and with tests like the Dutch test that may not necessarily be the case. It may not be that your adrenal glands are tired and not able to produce enough cortisol. It may be that they can, but your body is just not able to use it because there's so many stressors that your body is protecting you from having too much cortisol. So it's getting rid of it very quickly. And so all the things that we just talked about with low testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone could be reasons why your body would be getting rid of excess cortisol really quickly. So the stressors, the toxicities in your life, the environmental toxins, gut infections, irregular blood sugar, structural things, if you've had a car accident, long-standing mental emotional stress, all of those things can have an impact on your cortisol levels. And if you're constantly under stress, your body goes into protective mode and wants to lower that cortisol and not keep it running through your system because it's not good for you to have high levels of cortisol all the time. And so that may be why you're actually feeling tired, not because your adrenal glands aren't producing enough.
And so for this person, what is their levels? What is it doing for them?
So in this person, their production is actually very high. So it's very close to the very high end of the range for the amount of cortisol that their body is actually producing. So we know that this person is under a lot of stress and their body is demanding this cortisol to make it through the day. And they haven't gotten to the point where the body is minimizing the amount of cortisol used, but it is starting to slow down. And so what that's meaning is the body is trying to kick in and say, okay, look, you've got way too much stress going on. We've got too much cortisol in the system. You need to slow down. So we're going to start, getting rid of that cortisol really quickly out of your system so that you don't have so much of it. And so it's kind of trending towards that this person is going to start losing the amount of cortisol available in their system and start to feel more tired as time goes on if they don't stop and figure out what all of the stressors are and work on them.
Yeah. And then sometimes we also see where it's like flatlined, where it's just straight across.
Yes. And we have seen that with some people. And that's a situation generally where a person has been assaulted with all of the different stressors for a very long period of time. And so they may not even know that their body has been affected by the different stress, but it's been going on for a long time. And their body is at this point of, we are struggling to keep up. There is too much for us to keep up with. And I think Dr. Carrie Jones mentioned this on the podcast she did with you, the analogy of the bathtub of, you have a bathtub and you fill it up with water and you can only hold so much water if the drain is closed. And the people who are flatlined, their drain is clogged and the water is just overfilling, like it's overflowing. It can't handle any more stress. It's just trying to keep up and it can't. And so we do see this commonly in some women where their levels are flatlined because they've had so many stressors for such a long period of time. And they haven't been able to dig deeper to find out what is causing stress and what can they do to make improvements and to lower their stress load.
Yeah, and that's why when people come to us, it doesn't matter the age, everyone's in a panic to get pregnant and have their child. But it's really to take time to look at the whole body and heal. And so, we have the 6-month program, but sometimes the 6 months is just not enough. Sometimes it's a year to be able to work on. If you've had chronic stress, be it food sensitivities, gut infections, autoimmune, whatever it may be, it doesn't just magically clear up. It takes time.
For sure. And that's one of the things that, I think it's a hard part of the healing process or rebuilding your health is that we're very impatient. We're a very impatient society and we want things to happen quickly. But if something has been going on for a very long time, you have to be comfortable and patient enough to know that it may take time for that to get better. And so if we have somebody who comes to us that's in this situation where their bathtub is overflowed and their stress level is at an all-time high and their body is struggling to keep up, it's important to remember that even if you are successful and become pregnant, that is a huge stress on your body. Not to mention what happens to your body postpartum, where your sleep is very dysregulated afterwards. It's very rare for you to get a full 8 hours of sleep for the first few years after having a baby. And so if you're already depleted to begin with, and then you add that on top of it, it's almost a recipe for more severe symptoms down the road. And so really addressing this now is going to set you up for the best possible health and your ability to be there and be healthier and have more energy for your kids.
Okay, so anything else you wanted to say on the cortisol side of things?
Not really. I mean, I think I went on a little bit of a soapbox about the cortisol, but I think it is an important one. And rather than just going with the whole analogy of adrenal fatigue, the Dutch test kind of gives us some insights and tells us, what kind of stress the person is under and what capacity they have left to handle any more stress. And almost in a way, how important it is to really start digging deeper into those stressors and start addressing them and eliminating them and taking the burden off the body.
Mm-hmm. So the next one we have is DHEA. And it seems a common course of treatment for someone that has low ovarian reserve, low AMH, high FSH is to supplement with DHEA. And our thing is to see, I would say the majority of people that I ask if they've been tested, if their levels have been tested, the answer is no.
Right. And I mean, I can understand why this happens. DHEA is, in a sense, a precursor hormone. So you could take DHEA and your body can use DHEA and convert it into testosterone or estrogen or progesterone. And so it's easy sometimes to start with just giving somebody DHEA. You can take it at a lower dose. It's easy to take. And then hope that your body will take that DHEA and use it the way it needs it to balance out the hormones. Unfortunately, that's not always the way it happens. And so if you're not testing it and you're supplementing with DHEA, then you don't know what your body is doing with that hormone. You could be taking DHEA and your body decides, well, I'm going to use it and all I'm going to do is make testosterone. And your testosterone levels are going to go really high off the charts. And then you'll start having symptoms of androgen dominance and PCOS and things like that. And that's not what you want, when originally your purpose for taking DHEA was hoping that it would raise your estrogen levels. So it's really important to be testing. And we actually very commonly, almost all the time, actually see women who are taking DHEA. But yet, if you look at the levels when we test it, their DHEA levels aren't that high. So they're in the range, but they aren't that high, even though they're supplementing. And it's an interesting thing to see. And the problem also with DHEA is that it needs to go through a process to DHEAS, which is the sulfated form of DHEA, which is the form that your body uses. And there's a lot of things that can interfere with that conversion. So things like inflammation, blood sugar dysregulation, insulin resistance, toxins, food sensitivities, gut bugs, those are all things that can actually interfere with that process of converting DHEA into the usable form of DHEAS. So, we've kind of see these things that are stressors on the body that play a role in lowering our hormone levels, but it's also now playing a role in our body's ability to convert hormones to the way that we need them and the way that the body needs them. And so this is something that we actually see very often. And when we say inflammation, we're not just talking about like an inflamed joint, but inflammation overall in the body could be from all of the stressors we talked about: nutrient deficiencies, mental emotional stress, leaky gut, food sensitivities, blood sugar imbalances, the list can go on. And it's very common for a lot of people to have some degree of inflammation in their body for those reasons.
Yeah, so taking a supplement for DHEA it does different things for different people.
Right, and it may not even be beneficial to you, because if you're taking it and you have high levels of inflammation, or you have some degree of insulin resistance, then that may block your body's ability to even convert it and be able to use it. And this is something that we see really commonly. And if you're not testing and you're not seeing whether or not it's actually doing what you're hoping that it does, it's kind of, again, that analogy of we're putting a Band-Aid on a situation and we're not digging deeper to see what's going on.
Right. And for this person, their DHEA, what's happening there?
So the DHEA is in the range, but it's at the low end of the range. So, I mean, this person is not supplementing with DHEA, so it does look like they're producing an okay amount, but it definitely could be better. And again, some of the reasons, why they're not producing enough is the micronutrient deficiencies, not absorbing and breaking down the fats and the cholesterol, the inflammation, gut bugs, blood sugar imbalances. Those are all issues that can be a reason why somebody's not producing enough DHEA.
Okay. And then, so as far as the test, did you want to go to melatonin, or you want to go right on to the next page, the androgen?
So we'll go on to the next page where it kind of breaks down. So that if you're looking at the Dutch test, that'll be page 3. And this is where it gives us a breakdown of how the testosterone breaks down in its components, and how estrogen breaks down into its components. So because we just talked about DHEA and we talked a lot about testosterone, let's talk about the downstream components of testosterone. So testosterone breaks down into 2 different dominant pathways. One of them is what we call the 5-alpha pathway, and the other one is the 5-beta pathway. The alpha pathway is the one that if most of your testosterone is going down there, you're going to have symptoms that are androgenic. So what that means is that you are going to have more symptoms of things like greasy skin, hair coming up on your face that you don't want, anger, aggression, those sorts of things. And those are really common things that we see with people with PCOS. A lot of times people with PCOS, their testosterone is going down that pathway of being more androgenic, and you're going to have those symptoms. So ideally in women, we want to see kind of a nice balance between those 2, the alpha and the beta. And then with this particular client, we know that their overall testosterone levels are pretty low, but it is pretty equally going down both pathways. So there isn't a lot of symptoms of excess androgens, which is a good thing.
And then as far as progesterone?
So the progesterone, again, we don't really get a lot of information on progesterone with the Dutch test, but ideally we want to see there's the 5-alpha and the 5-beta again for progesterone, and we want those to be somewhat even. You may see sometimes if there's a preference for the alpha, especially in women, that they'll have a hard time sleeping, or they'll have a lot of anxiety. And so if we see that could be a reason why somebody feels a little bit more stressed maybe in the last half of their cycle, or they're a little bit more anxious. And so helping to balance out the progesterone can sometimes help that anxious feeling. But most of the time, a lot of the tests that I've seen, it's pretty even that the progesterone are going evenly down both pathways. And for this particular person, it's pretty equal for the progesterone.
Okay. And then as far as the estrogens?
So for the estrogens, it actually breaks it down into 3 different ones. So estrone, which is E1, estradiol, which is E2, and estriol, which is E3. And so estrone, E1, this is the second most potent estrogen in the body, and it's mostly made from the adrenal glands and in the adipose tissue or fat tissues. And so when a woman goes into menopause, the bulk of her estrogen is actually going to be coming from estrone, because the adrenal glands actually take over from the ovaries and start to produce the estrogen that she needs. And then also estrogen will come from the fat tissues when you're in menopause. So that is E1, or estrone. Estriol is the most potent estrogen, and it's the major estrogen that's produced by the ovaries. So this is the one that we would normally see in women who aren't in menopause, where the bulk of their estrogen would be made. And so this is, we want to see healthy levels if you're not menopausal in estriol. estradiol. And then the last one is estriol, or E3. And this is actually the estrogen that's predominantly made while you're pregnant. So we don't normally, unless you are pregnant, we don't normally see this level really, really high because it's the one mostly made when you're pregnant, but it also can be made by the other two hormones. Your body can kind of break down those other two hormones and make estriol if it needs to. So for this particular person that we're looking at, they're both the estrone, so E1, and the estradiol, E2, are within range, and they're at the pretty high end of the range. And then the E3 is at the very low end of the range. So, I mean, this person is not pregnant, so we wouldn't expect that level to be very high.
And then going down those different pathways here, so the 16-OH and the 4-OH.
Yeah, so what the Dutch test does is it takes estrone, or E1, and it breaks it down even further to see how your body is utilizing the estrogens that you're making. And so we kind of talked about at the top of the show, we really want to make sure that the estrogen that you are making is what we would consider the good protective kind. And so that is what is called the 2-OH estrogen. And the majority of that is what we want to be seeing, because that's the good protective estrogen. That's the one that's going to, make you feel feminine. It's the one that's going to help with fertility. It's going to be the one that helps with like bone health, and those sorts of things. So that's the bulk of where we want to see it. And then there's also, the next one is 4-OH. And that is the estrogen that, everybody has a little bit of it, but when it's too high, that's when it can become a concern, because that's the estrogen that can be damaging to the DNA. So we don't want to have high levels of that, because we don't want to have DNA damage. And if we have a lot of DNA damage, that can lead to things like cancers. And so that's something that we don't want to see. And then the last one is 16-OH. And although it's not the best kind of estrogen, it's not as negative as having 4-OH, but we also don't want to see high levels of 16-OH estrogen, because that can be damaging and not good as well.
Yeah, so people sometimes think even if they have low ovarian reserve, that with the 4-OH being going down, so it could still, the estrogen that you have could still be going down the wrong pathway. So it could be estrogen dominance in there, or am I getting that wrong?
So it may not be estrogen dominance, but you're right. Even if your estrogen levels are low, if most of the estrogen that you're making is going down that 4-OH, we definitely want to support the body to convert to the more protective 2-OH and move away from the 4-OH. So even if your estrogen levels are low, there's definitely things that we can do to support your body's conversion to using estrogens correctly. And that a lot of that has to do with supporting the liver, because the liver is really important in this process. So this downstream is kind of called phase 1 detox. And so this is where we would want to support phase 1 detox of the liver. And I don't want to kind of go down this big rabbit hole of the different levels of detox or phases of detox of the liver, but enough to say it's very important to be supporting your detox pathways. And so the very first thing that you can do to see how well you're detoxing is, are you having a bowel movement every day? That's really important, because if you aren't, and you're having a bowel movement every other day, you have toxins that are building up in your system. You need to be eliminating every day. And so the major organs, we know about the liver as a detox organ, but breath. So breath is a big one. We're kind of expelling toxins through our breath. So things like deep breathing and exercise are going to be really helpful and important for detox, because we're really working the lungs and getting out the old air and carbon dioxide that we breathe out. Sweating. So our skin is a big detox organ. And so if you're not sweating and sweating out the toxins, then that can be a problem. So if you're not exercising and sweating, or even sauna is amazing. That's a really, really good way to help your body detox. Then you may not be detoxifying as effectively as you can. And some of the other things that we like to do with skin is something like skin brushing. It helps to kind of exfoliate the skin, open the pores, and allow things to come out. And somebody who suffers from a lot of skin issues like acne that is also a sign that there's toxins trying to come out and they're not able to. And it's kind of like a reflection of how well your body is doing internally. So we had breath, we have the skin, the liver, like we talked about, the bowels. So the bowels are super important. Like I said, you need to be having bowel movements every day. And then urinating is another way that we eliminate. And so we want to make sure that you're hydrated and you're eliminating as much as you can. So that's all going to be, that's kind of the first step in looking at detoxification without digging deeper into all of the different ways that you can support it. I mean, those are the main things to start with and look at and see how you're doing in those areas first.
Yeah, we usually have the skin brushing, the sauna, Epsom salt baths. There's on my website, FabFertile, FABfertile.com. There's a rest and restore detox bath. So you can look that up with Epsom salts and Himalayan salt. And then also dandelion tea or milk thistle. We recommend that. And yeah, drinking lots of water. Also DIM in this case too.
Yeah. So for this particular person, if we kind of just take a quick look at how the phase 1 is doing. So most of the estrogen this person is making is the 2-OH, but they do have very high levels of 4-OH. And so we don't want to see that. So we want to provide some support to help eliminate that excess estrogen that could be recirculating in the body and causing problems and DNA damage. And so in this situation, that's when you would use something like DIM, because DIM works really well to lower that. Some other things that help to lower excess levels of 4-OH are cruciferous vegetables. So the things like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, those are all work really well. They're the cruciferous vegetable family. And also supporting the liver, like we talked about, all of the detox pathways, making sure that those are working properly so that you're really helping that liver to eliminate the excess estrogen and to convert it into the nice protective 2-OH estrogen.
Yeah, I guess the key here is that you may have heard about these different detox strategies and different stages of liver detox, but with this test, it just allows us to take that very targeted action plan, so to really customize it to see what's going on for you.
And one of the other things that I've commonly seen is, people will try to they'll do some quizzes online and they'll say, well, it seems like I have a lot of estrogen dominant symptoms, so maybe I'll take some DIM and that will help. And that may not be the best idea unless you know for sure. Because if the estrogens that you are making are mostly 2-OH and your 4-OH estrogen, the bad estrogen that we call it, is low, taking DIM may not be good because it'll actually lower the estrogens that you are making and then cause a situation where you have low estrogen. And that's not what you want. So what you would do, and that's why it's important to test. You really need to see what specifically your body is doing. You can't just go by just a total estrogen number and assume that taking DIM is going to fix it. That may not be the best solution for you. You may not need DIM. You may need to do other things like boost your progesterone levels to bring it back into balance, or just dig deeper into the stressors and start to eliminate those. And that in turn will help to regulate your levels and bring progesterone and estrogen back into balance.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you wanted to say on the estrogens?
So the only other thing that we look at on the Dutch test with the estrogens is it gives us some information about the next phase of detoxification, or phase 2, or methylation. And so for this person, they actually are not methylating very well. We do know that they have MTHFR. Now this test doesn't tell you. So if it says you're not methylating well, it doesn't necessarily say you have MTHFR, but it can give us some clues that may be an issue for you. And so investigating it further might be a good idea.
Mm-hmm. That's the environmental toxins there are really key.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now down to page number, 5, Brandy?
Yeah, it'll be page number 5, and that's where we are talking about melatonin.
Great.
So melatonin, did you want to ask a question, or do you want me to just jump into what melatonin is?
I think a lot of people are potentially could be supplementing with melatonin, because we're told that's a good thing if you're having a hard time sleeping. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, and then we can dig into the test.
Sure. So yeah, melatonin is something that very commonly a lot of people are taking, and I find personally a lot of people are taking too much melatonin. So, we have people who take like 7 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 11 milligrams. I mean, that's a lot of melatonin, and it can be beneficial in certain situations. So, if you're traveling overseas and you're jet lagged and you're dealing with different time zones, that can definitely be helpful. But using melatonin long term isn't really a good strategy, and you definitely want to be testing. So, that same adage that we're always saying, test, don't guess. That's where looking at the melatonin marker on the Dutch test can give us some information. So this particular person does have very low melatonin levels, and it's outside of the range. And there's a few reasons that can happen. So if your cortisol level is very high, and it's actually very high in the evening, that will suppress your body's ability to create melatonin. So they're kind of opposites. Melatonin and cortisol are opposites. We already talked about how cortisol should be highest in the morning to give you energy and lowest at night. And when it goes really low at night, what happens is your body starts to produce melatonin to prepare you for sleep. But if you have a lot of stress going on and your cortisol level is high at night, that will suppress your body's ability to produce melatonin. Some of the other things that are more and more common nowadays that will suppress melatonin is a lot of blue light at night. So if it's like 8 o'clock at night and you have every light on in the house and your TV is on and you're looking at your phone or you're looking at your iPad, all of this blue light is entering your eyes and signaling to your brain it's still daytime. It's not time to create melatonin. And so when you're ready to go to bed at 10 o'clock and you've had everything on and you're staring at your screen, you're going to lie there at night thinking, well, why can't I fall asleep? And it's because you never gave your brain that signal that it was time to wind down and that it was time to start raising your melatonin levels. So if we think about back before, so one of the reasons why melatonin is really important is because melatonin is an antioxidant. And so if you don't have sufficient levels of melatonin, then you're not giving your body the ability to detoxify while you're sleeping, which isn't a good thing. And then you'll probably feel unrested, even though you may be getting 8 or 9 hours of sleep. If you don't have high enough levels of melatonin, when you wake up in the morning, you may feel like you never even slept. So it's really, really important to test to see what your melatonin levels are doing, and then look at some of the reasons why your melatonin levels will be low. So as I said, for this particular person, their melatonin level is extremely low. It's outside of the range. And so we would be looking at things like, what is their nighttime routine? Are they using blue blockers? Are they lowering their lights at night? Is their cortisol level too high at night? And if so, why? And what are some things that we can do to lower that? One of the other reasons that melatonin could be low is whether there's some stuff going on in the gut. So if your body isn't able to digest the foods that you're eating, it's not going to be able to make the building blocks to produce melatonin. And so you may not be able to produce adequate melatonin levels. And this is something that we commonly see in people that have a lot of gut infections is low melatonin. So the gut infections are causing an imbalance of the gut. You're not able to break down and absorb the foods that you're eating. There's a lot of stress and inflammation going on in there. And so your melatonin levels are going to be low.
And we see a lot of people with parasites too, and that impacts the melatonin as well, right? Because parasites are more active at night.
For sure, yes. And that could be something common where people will say, I just don't understand. Like, I'm tired all day, and then nighttime I get the second wind and I can't sleep and I'm just staring at the ceiling. And the parasites or gut bugs or bacterial infections, they tend to be more active at night. So when they raise your cortisol levels. So it's going to keep you awake and suppress your melatonin. And so you can't sleep. So it's this kind of never ending cycle that's really frustrating for people. And I think we do have an epidemic of sleep deprivation with people, which is not a good thing because, as I said, with the melatonin, it's a potent antioxidant. And so if your body's not detoxifying and you're not able to rebuild and repair while you're sleeping, you're going to start aging faster. You're going to have more toxins going through your system. And it's just this hamster wheel that you're going on. And so this is actually a really important marker to look at when we're looking at all of the markers of the Dutch test.
Yeah, we work with couples for months on sleep hygiene, like having a dark room, moving up the clutter, using the blue light blockers, looking at like having essential oils or having that sleep routine. So you're dimming the lights, you're taking the phone out of the room, all these things that you do it over a course of months, because it's as you mentioned, the sleep epidemic, right? Where we kind of are priding ourselves for staying up and pulling all-nighters, where it's, you really need for fertility and for health and 7 to 9 hours, and to sort of feel what feels right for you as to, do you wake up when you wake up, how many hours do you naturally need without an alarm clock? And maybe for you, the sweet spot is 8 or 9. And no, we're not always going to get that, but to really try to prioritize this.
For sure. And I mean, there is certain situations where melatonin is useful. And so for somebody like this who has really low melatonin, taking some supplemental melatonin for a short period of time probably would be a good idea. But the caveat would be you need to work on all of the sleep hygiene while you're doing that, so that you can start to produce your own melatonin levels, healthy melatonin levels on your own. Temporary fix, it's not a permanent solution.
And what's your take of people that have taken melatonin for years? I think some people just, if they're having issues sleeping, they're just supplementing with melatonin.
And that can actually open a whole other discussion of, it's kind of like this feedback loop of, if you've been taking melatonin for years, then that signal is not going to the brain to produce your own melatonin. And so your body is going to start to rely on it. And this is the same and true, not just with melatonin, but people who take Ambien for years.
Right.
It could take a lot of time to really correct that, a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience. It can be done, but we really have to start thinking about all of the reasons why we couldn't sleep in the first place, and really work on that sleep hygiene like you talked about. And we can give some support, but taking long-term melatonin or Ambien or anything else, Tylenol PM or some of those other things that help you sleep, it's just a Band-Aid. It's not a good long-term solution. And you're actually not doing yourself a favor, because you're losing that natural ability for your body to detoxify and have a potent antioxidant.
Mm-hmm. I know, and you see people younger being prescribed sleeping pills, in their teenage years being prescribed this, which is okay. So, and is anything else on this page with the cortisone and the cortisol?
So I'll just talk briefly about the cortisol versus cortisone. So cortisol, we already talked about, is what your adrenal glands are making. And so this page will look at the free cortisol. So that's the amount of cortisol your body actually has available to use. And then it looks at the free cortisone. And cortisone is the inactive form of cortisol. And so if your body is under a tremendous amount of stress, your body may start taking that cortisol that it has available and converting it to cortisone, the inactive form, again, as a protective mechanism. Our body is so wise. Like it wants to protect us. It wants us to thrive. So it will do things to protect us. And so if we have somebody, and this particular person does have a situation where their body is preferring cortisone, it's because there's so much cortisol going on that the body's trying to protect itself. And it's almost like a message to your body to say, you need to slow down. You need to look at what's going on in your life, and it's time to slow down. We're doing the best we can to protect you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this test, the Dutch test, we work with clients internationally, so it can be shipped internationally, part of our couples coaching program. Although taking the test by itself is great, we always recommend doing a food sensitivity test with it. And also we use the GI map, which is our stool test, looking at the DNA of the stool. So really combining these 3 tests, and then, developing an action, a personalized plan for you. So, and then taking, you needing that at least 6 months to be able to work on these things, because it's been going on however old you are right now. It doesn't just magically disappear over a month. It really is taking the time to focus on your health. And although you may feel major pressure right now to move to your next IUI or IVF, we really highly recommend to look to see what is going on, your body is really, it'll whisper to you, then it's going to start shouting at you in the form of disease, and infertility is disease. But really, we don't focus on the diagnosis. We dig further using these tools of functional medicine and test, don't guess. So if you're interested in the couples coaching program, you can set up a free call with me. It's just a short application, and then we will discuss the program in detail and see if it's a right fit for you. But yeah, really focusing on your preconception health is always a good idea.
For sure. And this was a really broad overview, and there's so much more we can dig into with the Dutch test, and it's very, very individualized. But I hope that just by going through this, we can kind of give you some insights into how much information it can give us. And even though the information may be overwhelming, it's positive and empowering, because it can give some action steps and some things that you can do to really make improvements in your health and with your fertility.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brandy. This is great as usual, and have a fabulous day, everyone. If you're ready to get to the bottom of why you're struggling to conceive, the Dutch test is a great place to start. So we offer a Dutch test review. All you need to do is go to the show notes, click on Dutch test review. And once that has been purchased, then we will send you the information about the test kit. The test kit is an additional cost, and test kits are shipped worldwide. Again, just go to the show notes, click on Dutch test review, or you can go to my website at FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, click on shop and Dutch test. So excited for you to dig further and figure out how the Dutch test can really help us develop a protocol that can get to the bottom of why you're struggling to conceive. Melatonin is important for female fertility. It helps regulate hormones and maintain the body's circadian rhythms. Plus, it helps determine the frequency and duration of the menstrual cycle. Plus, it impacts sperm count and motility. Blue and green light negatively impact our melatonin production. That's why we recommend Blue Blocks, blue and green light sleep glasses to all our one-to-one clients. Simply go to Blue Blocks, BLUBLOX.com, and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast at checkout to receive your 15% discount. That's BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com, and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast. Hey there, I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call is for action takers. Really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FABfertile.com, and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FABfertile.com, and click on book a free call. The Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, including show notes and links, provides information with respect to healthy living, nutrition, lab testing, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice, and always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.